Hello there, and welcome to the first episode of the VictorPrep Vocab podcast. I'm Sam. I'm going to be the host of this podcast. And let's start with why it's called VictorPrep. Well, first of all, the podcast needed a name, and I decided to call it VictorPrep because Victor means a person who defeats an enemy or opponent. And I think a lot of the people who will listen to this podcast are taking some exam like the SAT or the GRE or maybe some other test or some other exam that requires good English skills, good vocabulary, and they want to beat it. So why not call it VictorPrep? Because together we are going to beat something, whatever it ends up being. So who am I? Well, my name is Sam. I'm a software engineer. I work in video games in California. I'm originally British, as you may have guessed from the accent. And why am I doing this? So I took the GRE myself some years ago now, and I realized to get a super good score, I was going to need to improve my vocabulary. I read a lot of books, I had a pretty good vocabulary already, but I knew to get the highest scores, you really do need to know a lot of words. So I made a big list of all the GRE words. I looked through many GRE books. I took all those different word lists together and made one mega word list, and I set about learning it. And as part of that process, I made a lot of little recordings for myself. And I found that listening to those little recordings helped me a lot in learning the words. And this may sound a little weird now, but I really enjoyed making those recordings. I really liked it a lot. And so I always said to myself, you know what? Someday I'd like to start a podcast and use my experiences in learning those words and help other people. I really love some of the other learning websites out there, like especially something like Khan Academy. And I love teaching people. And I thought, why not use my experience in prepping for the GRE and learning all these words and use this experience to help all the other people out there who I know are struggling with this, because it is difficult, it does take time, and there aren't many really good resources out there I've found for doing this. So here I go. Obviously though, I am new at this, so please go easy on me. If you have any requests, any feedback, please get in touch with me. I'll let you guys know my email at the end of the show. Let me know if I go too fast, too slow, if the quality seems weird, if there's too much noise. I'm still trying to work out all the kinks with the recording, all this stuff. What am I going to want from you? Well, first of all, relax. Don't stress too much. If you worry too much about whether you're going to remember the words, are you remembering them, it's going to make it harder for you. There have been various studies on this, and they always say that if you're very stressed, if you're trying really hard and worrying a lot and beating yourself up, it's actually going to make learning way harder. So take it easy, try and relax, try and have fun with it if you can. It's going to make it way easier on yourself. What else am I going to need you to do? So, as you're listening to me talk about the words, I'm going to want you to construct your own sentences concerning these words in your head. So I'm going to give you cues during the podcast where you could pause the recording and think of your own sentence involving the word. That's kind of important to do, and I really encourage you to pause at those points and think up your own imaginative sentence concerning the word. Because if you can't come up with a sentence concerning the word, then you just don't know it. It's really that simple. You really should be able to come up with any number of sentences once you really understand the meaning of that word. And you're never really going to remember a word unless you can come up with those sentences. So that's really important. If you're in a car or some situation where pausing is difficult, afterwards, after the show is over, you should go over the 4 words. I'm going to try and do 4 words per show. I want you to go over them afterwards and say the word in your mind, and then think of a sentence. Ideally, do it a couple of times, just to really make sure you have an understanding of the meaning of the word. And then at the start of the next episode, I will review the previous words. What I'm also going to do is, at the end of each podcast, I'm going to reverse it and describe one of the words, and I want you to think of which word it is I'm describing. So, I've taken my mega list of words, I've randomized them, and now I have the list of all the words that I'm going to go over in this sequence of podcasts, and it is a long list. So if this podcast continues, there are going to be many, many episodes because there are a lot of words. And I decided, because I thought it made sense, to do 4 words per podcast, because I think the length of the podcasts may get too long on average if we do more than 4 words. But this is up for debate. So if you have requests about that or any thoughts, suggestions, please let me know. So, before we get started, one more thing. I'm going to try and make this podcast family friendly because there may be younger students, maybe even children, teenagers whose parents want them to listen to a vocabulary word building podcast. I'm really going to try to not use any bad language. I'll do my best. Please point out if I've slipped up somewhere. I apologize. So, without further ado, let's get started on our words for today. So, the first word is euphemism. The word again is euphemism. That's EUPHEMISM. Euphemism. So it's not written at all like it sounds. It doesn't start with a U. It's quite deceptive that way. And what does euphemism mean? It's a mild or indirect word or expression that's substituted for one that's considered to be more harsh or blunt. So don't let this sound too complex and intimidating. We hear this thing all the time. When someone has died, often people say they passed away. Or when people are talking about having had sex, often someone might say, oh, he slept with her. They don't say they had sex. They say, oh, they slept together. Or someone, instead of saying, oh, I went to the bathroom to pee, they say, oh, I went to the little boy's room. Or I went to go and freshen up. Now, what are good ways of remembering the meaning of this word? So, euphemism, the U at the start of euphemism, the EU, means something good or well. So, you could think euphoria. That means a state of immense well-being or happiness. Or you could think eulogy, which means a speech saying something good about someone. The second part of the word, the euphemism part, means speaking. So the whole word together means good speaking, euphemism. It's from Greek, I think. There's actually an opposite to this word. It's dysphemism, and that means substituting a worse equivalent of a word. So you could refer to your friend's car as a banger instead of a car. That would be a dysphemism, a bad way of saying something. So that's our first word. Now, feel free to take a pause and think of a way of using that word in a sentence, or even think of an example of a euphemism. Our second word of the podcast is endemic. Endemic, that's Endemic. And endemic, think endemic. Demic, think people, democracy. Endemic, in people. Endemic means natural to or characteristic of a certain people or a certain place. It means native or indigenous. So an example of that would be malaria is a disease that is endemic to certain parts of Central Africa. Another example could be talking about the weather is endemic to people in the UK, because in the UK, people always talk about the weather. So if you think of any particular feature or character of the people where you're from, where you're listening now, that feature is endemic to people of your region. It's as simple as that, really. How can you remember this? Well, when you have a word starting with N, think of N often meaning in. So that's your first clue. Endemic means in something. Now, you might struggle remembering what the demic part means. So you could think of democracy. You know that democracy means something to do with people. So think of endemic, and democracy, in people. Democracy has something to do with people, you know that. And N, you can easily think in. So yeah, think in people. That's your key to remembering this one. So can you think of an example now where you use the word endemic? Our third word is dessicate. Dessicate. That's Dessiccate. Dessicate. That's a verb, and it means to dry thoroughly, to dry until something is completely dry, in a sense. So you can think of grapes being desiccated, having the water removed from them. They then become raisins. Ways of remembering this word: desiccation, think maybe desert. It's very dry there. If you left anything there that had water in it, the water would be removed from it slowly because it's just so dry and hot. So desiccation is the removal of water, drying, something being extremely dry and shriveled up like a raisin. Desiccation. Our fourth word and final word for today is idiosyncrasy. Idiosyncrasy. That's IDIOSYNCRASY. Idiosyncrasy. Now, what that means is everyone knows someone who has a peculiar characteristic or habit or some sort of mannerism that they do that makes them unique. You could think of any of your friends, especially that one friend who's a little bit crazy, a little bit weird. That thing that they do that's unique to them. Maybe they have a crazy laugh, or maybe they have a facial tic, or some sort of thing they do all the time that's their thing. That is an idiosyncrasy. Something maybe unusual, maybe unique to a certain person. That is an idiosyncrasy. As an aside, it's important to realize that an idiosyncrasy isn't necessarily negative either. Most people will have some idiosyncrasies. It's something that's some habit or mannerism or characteristic of someone that is peculiar to them or unique to them. Not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing, although obviously it can, depending on your perspective, be positive or negative. So an example of using the word idiosyncrasy is I once had a friend who had a particular habit or idiosyncrasy of clicking his fingers when he was trying to remember something. And when he really couldn't remember it, he would snap his fingers vigorously trying to remember whatever it was. So we're done now with our 4 words of the day, and I'm just going to briefly go over them. And then after briefly going over them again, I'm going to describe the word without using the word, and I want you to think about which word it is in your mind. So our four words are euphemism, which is a nice way of referring to something that's often bad or unpleasant. Endemic, which means something that's characteristic of a certain place or people. Dessicate, which means to dry up, to dry thoroughly, to preserve food by removing moisture. And our final word is idiosyncrasy, which is a peculiar characteristic of someone, or a unique habit of someone. So, in these example sentences, which of the words am I talking about? I dried the meat thoroughly to preserve it for my long journey through the desert. My old friend had a habit of pulling on his earlobe whenever he was nervous. When I was between jobs, I had a lot of time on my hands. Chickenpox is an illness which is always present at some level in the United Kingdom. So, those were our 4 words for today. This podcast has gone on a little longer because it's the first one, I think, than I want the other podcast to go. This has been about 16 minutes so far, but I think normally I'd want the podcast to be about 10 or 12 minutes long for 4 words. So, apologies for that if it seems too long. But now you should have a good understanding of those 4 words. You should probably tonight, later on, go over them in your head, make sure you still remember, look at the podcast title, which will have the 4 words in, and test yourself. It's good to occasionally test yourself to keep them fresh. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at sam.fold, that's F-O-L-D, like fold paper, sam.fold@gmail.com. That's my email address. Feel free to, and this is really encouraged actually, feel free to pass any advice, especially any feedback on the quality, the format, how you felt it was. That's really, really appreciated. So thank you very much, and I will see you next time.